all I wanted to do was work. And I only felt relaxed and calm and happy when I was working. And I thought if I worked harder and fought harder, then I'd get ahead and I'd win. And then I realised that's not how to play the game.
Welcome, Lucy Buckley. As you know, this podcast is really to get a perspective on the mental health challenges and resilience from those people who've run and been involved with a distressed business and had to make those tough decisions. Your company, Dr. Fertility Limited, went into liquidation a couple of years ago. If you describe who you are and what you do.
Yeah, no problem. I'm Lucy. I'm a pharmacist by background. I've had a very unusual career as a pharmacist, which started in research and development when I did a PhD in drug discovery. I've had clinical roles in the NHS and the private sector, but spent a significant proportion of my career in big pharma and had the experience of going through the whole of the product life cycle. I then launched Dr. Fertility. We were the first online primary care provider for fertility that was registered with the Care Quality Commission, which is something I'm still very proud of. And since then, I have moved on to launch my own digital healthcare advisory.
And as I said, this isn't a case study on the company and the kind of the do's and don'ts. There's lots of other ways to assess that. This is about you and people in your position. But just for a little bit of context, it'd be useful just to understand the origins of the business and the idea and what ambitions you had.
Dr. Fertility started off as an e-commerce website where we curated higher quality fertility products and developed high quality information to support people on their fertility journey. We then raised our first round of investment to turn that business into a digital healthcare provider. So we went through registration with the Care Quality Commission and became one of the first online primary care provider for fertility that was registered with the Care Quality Commission. We did another fundraise to help build out our care pathways and those services. And then unfortunately, our third fundraise, we had someone pull out at the 11th hour. And that's why we ended up going through the liquidation process.
And can you think of any, I guess, key factors that led to the decline? In some businesses, it could be the environment, it could be the pandemic, etc. It could be poor planning, it could be generally the market has changed. Lots of different factors. Can you pinpoint now anything where you think, yeah, maybe we may have seen perhaps that coming and could have done something about it, or was it all out of your control?
It's a good question, and I think for me that sort of feeds into a wider piece for me as a person, because up until sort of that point of before I ran my own business, I probably had quite a lot of black and white thinking. So I've been fairly academic. So for me, energy in always equaled results out. Then you enter the business world where there are a lot of variables and some factors you can't control. For example, COVID, the political climate, other people. So there's lots of factors, and I think it's something I've reflected on a lot. And I think these things are always multifactorial. I think you always play a part in that, and you have to take that responsibility and accountability. But you may be dealing with you may have your terrain may suddenly become quite treacherous.
In no particular order, if you kind of explain some of the emotions that you went through. And also, and I hear this all the time, having spoken to people over the last 25, 30 years, shame, guilt, anger, depression, lack of control, isolation, anxiety, betrayal. There's a whole load of emotions and characteristics involved. So just some of your reflections on some of those.
Yes. So for me, I naively had a bit of a mantra, which has shifted, was failure wasn't an option. And I refused to have a plan B. So I didn't have to spend any time going, oh, well, I wish I'd worked a bit harder, or I wish I'd not party, because I didn't. So that was helpful. Then you're really shocked because I naively thought we'd pull it off. I thought the raise had been more difficult this time, but I was so laser focused on it. So there's the shock, and then you feel so dreadful for everybody else. So you feel dreadful to your team, your co-founder, your investors, anyone you owe money to. You feel that's a really hard emotion to deal with. And then you feel bad to the patients as well, because we provided access to a healthcare service that we then had to close down.
So this is obviously with the benefit of hindsight and reflection. When you're in the moment, you're just looking at not self-preservation, but it's survival at, I guess, all costs. When you're facing that pressure, emotions running high, your logic is impacted, decision-making processes all over the place. What do you think you can learn in retrospect about perhaps how you may have saved yourself a little bit, paused, and maybe whether it's sought outside help or just kind of maybe took your time and was a little bit more patient with some of your decision making?
It depends, when you're going through things like this, and your reaction under pressure depends on the situation. So I read a book about 10 years ago that changed my life, called The Chimp Paradox. And I recommend
I've read
anybody.
That. Yeah.
It's literally one of my favourite books. And from reading this book, I learned a lot about myself, and learned that I probably have quite a lively chimp. So from reading the book, I set about to develop some kind of chimp control measures. Now the chimp can serve you well, but what I do recognise with myself is that if you have the luxury of small amounts of time, and I mean like maybe 24 hours, take them, let the emotion die down, have that self-awareness, have that self-reflection, and try not to have a bit of impulse control, I think is what I'm trying to say, if you can. And try and just let those emotions die down and be slightly more pragmatic and measured. It's easier said than done. But I think we acted quickly, but I think also it's who you surround yourself by. You have to find your tribe in these situations. Like, I think we're quite lucky with you. You really helped us and supported us, but we also had some incredible mentors and people who had been through it before. And that made a huge amount of difference. So what I would say is, don't bury your head in the sand. Reach out to anyone who's been through this, would help another person going through this.
Had you had 10 companies run at the same time, and this was one that didn't go right, your mindset and your attitude and your conduct and everything would have been, I guess, very different. And had you already had other failures in whatever shape or form, been involved with them, then again, that experience may have led you to make some different decisions. So what was that learning curve like for you from, I guess, maybe not having a limited company before, facing some of those issues? And what would the experience of taught you about how you dealt with things at the time?
So I think there's two things in my past that helped me deal with that. So I come from a family of entrepreneurs, and growing up, my dad had businesses and my uncles also had lots of businesses. And when I finally passed my driving test, I used to drive them to the pub on a Wednesday night and on a Sunday night. And I would sit in the pub with my dad and my uncle. And when you hear the phrase fag packet analysis, that's literally what they did. And I'd sort of sit there at 17, 18 before I went to university, kind of in awe of these discussions and intrigued and excited by them. And what was really helpful for me was that was kind of my first exposure to the entrepreneurial world. And I'd seen both of them have several businesses, and some hadn't worked, but overall they went on to be successful. And that helped me to have hope. So I think that was a key element of how I handled it when it happened. I also think another element that I want to sort of raise awareness of is in 2020, I ended up having some really strange neurological symptoms, and ended up having to have an MRI scan to rule out a brain tumor. Now, that was horrific time in my life. It was really hard.
Okay, take your time.
And that equipped me for this, because that's when I think I felt the burnout and the stress. And that changed my life. That was a life-changing moment for me, because those 2 weeks of getting these symptoms to getting the results from that MRI scan, I thought I had convinced myself that was it. And that changed my world. And what I'd learned, so up until this point, I thought I was invincible, and I think it was that realization that you cannot run yourself into the ground forever. And so all my symptoms and stress manifested physically. So I didn't realize that I was probably stressed and burnt out. I ended up with physical symptoms. I didn't expect myself to get emotional talking about that then, actually. But yeah, that was really hard.
It's a very emotional. Well, yeah. It is. It's a big part of your life, so of course you're going to be emotional.
Yeah. So, and I'd worked in healthcare my whole life. I'd never had any health anxiety. And I won't go into the details of my previous medical history, because I'm not sure it's that interesting, but I did end up having quite a few other health problems that seem to have disappeared since the business closed. So I think, I sort of developed a new mantra that your health is your wealth, and without it, you don't have anything else.
Absolutely. And I think you were in an environment in the pub, some good advisors at the pub generally, but not to take regulated advice from, I hasten to add. And you could have taken the view, well, it's okay, people kind of, get through it, and, these are bumps on the road, kind of bits of experience. So given that support mechanism you had and that experience, is it a surprise to you that you were still kind of, very proud and personally hurt by this, rather than thinking quite nonchalantly, well, it's one of those things, you try some, you lose some?
I think that it comes down to personality. And also, I'm sort of talking top level about the experiences with my dad. I saw how much that hurt him. And I think one of my motivations for doing the podcast was seeing him go through such a hard time and not having the support network that I had. And I think Dad lost a business in 2008 when a lot of people had a tough time, and he beat himself up about that for a very, very long time. And I think that really stayed with me, and I feel almost sad for him in a way that I've had the support I've had and Dad didn't have that, and he's come out the other end, and but it's not it really wasn't oh, you win some, you lose some. It was a terrible time, and it was probably one of the worst times in his life. So I had that as a point of reference. And I think just talking about the shame's an interesting word, isn't it? Because it was something I thought about a lot at the time. And I think it depended on who I was with. Some people really triggered that, and others didn't. And I found that really interesting at the time. And what I did find with people, once people know you're going through this problem, some people come out of the woodwork and support you, and that's really surprising. People you don't think. And I think you have different friends and different colleagues for different things, and I think that's really important. And there were some people that kind of came out of the woodwork and really helped with that. And there would be other people who perhaps triggered more of that shame. And I think what I would say to others is find your tribe. find the people who are right for you right now. And it doesn't mean that those other friends or family or colleagues are good or bad people at all. It just means you need a certain type of person and a certain type of support right now. And I do think it's like anything in life, unless you've been through it yourself, you are going to struggle to fully understand it. And I had some really wonderful people who kind of popped up, if you like, and opened up about their stories. That was really, really helpful.
You did have somebody at the top table with you running the company. Some people are sole traders, some people have 5, 10, etc., etc. You then have employees, you have investors, stakeholders, creditors, the taxman, advisors. It's very, very difficult being 100% honest in the right timescale with everybody. Because you've got to protect some people from the actual facts, and this is a really difficult one to wrestle with. So maybe you can give me some examples of how the relationship may have changed with your business partner, and also how you navigated some of those tough decisions with some of the stakeholders. A, you wanted to be factually correct. B, you needed to motivate them to continue to support you.
Well, I think Kobe and I had an incredibly strong friendship. And for me, one of the most important things going into that business was that we came out as strong, if not stronger. And that definitely happened. We stuck together like glue. You saw it. You witnessed that. We stuck together like glue, and we were a team, and that was incredibly powerful and incredibly helpful. And made a huge difference to both of us. And she absolutely won't mind me saying that. In terms of our investors, I think we're also very lucky. I've got experience in this sort of world with other founders, and I don't think everyone has been as lucky. We had really brilliant investors, and they were really supportive. They really helped us navigate the complexities of this. We had a brilliant team, and we were actually quite honest with our team. Anybody who was potentially impacted, Kobe and I personally contacted them. And I think that's really important. That would be my advice to anyone. Yeah, you absolutely do want to bury your head in the sand, but do not do that. It's the worst thing you can do. You've got to really step up and have those difficult conversations. And it's part of your personal growth. And they're not easy, but they get easier. And I think people really respect you for that. And going back to those nights in the pub, I remember my uncle saying to me, the only thing you take to the grave is your reputation. And I've got that ingrained in me.
Do you think that those sorts of traits can be something that you learn online or in the classroom? Or do you think, until you've actually lived through it, you don't really understand?
I think there's both, really. I think you can prepare yourself. And I think obviously your life experience is incredibly powerful. I also think it's important to understand that when we look at resilience and your mental health, it's very different and personal to different people and at different times in your life. So you may not know how you're going to react, because I think it depends on other factors. So, for example, say we're going through this with a business, but you've got a very sick relative, or you're going through divorce, or there's something else going on that's going to impact and potentially be a barrier to your resilience. So I don't think it's either you're resilient or not, you've built resilience or not. I think it's quite complex, and I think it depends on how full your cup is at the time. You may be going through a physical or a mental health condition alongside that, and that's going to impact how you handle that event. So I think it's important to perhaps recognise that this is very personal to you, not compare yourself to others. And if you need help and support, to always ask for it.
And do you think you've mentioned there, and I guess if you're a director of a company with thousands of employees, you just think, yeah, you're probably superhuman and you're not impacted by things like that. Do you think that there is I don't want to use the word stigma, but a reluctance for some people to recognise that they're not perfect and they're not made of steel, and if that goes unchecked, when they do crack, things can escalate very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you sometimes don't recognise yourself. So when I ended up getting ill and exhausted, I didn't recognise that. I was just doing what I'd always done, working. But I think what had happened was previously, if you think about a different environment where you may work to do an exam, you work very hard and intensely for a short period of time, and then you have a break. And what I wasn't doing was mixing it up. And I think that was the key difference. And I think we're all on this journey of continuously learning. You're learning about yourself all the time. And I do think you do get a bit of wisdom as you get a bit older, and that can serve you well during these times. But I do think it is incredibly personal. But what I have noticed is, there's a lot of people in the business community who have been through hard times and adversity. And I think what you can recognise in those people is there's a certain level of humility that comes with that, and you can spot that in people.
And if you were, say next time you sat in the pub, but if you were at the pub, read it in the proverbial, back of a fag packet, and you sat and there was somebody kind of overhearing your conversation, they may have been part of your group, and kind of they were picking up pieces of little nuggets of information that perhaps you got from your family. What messages would you like them to hear from you?
That's it. That's an interesting one. I think for me, is to, I think you're right. If you're that way inclined, and you have that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, is to have the courage and the bravery to go and do something you're passionate about. I'd say always model it out first. There was a lot of numbers chat in those pubs. Make sure your financial model works, but also act with integrity and stay true to your own values.
Lucy, that's been absolutely fantastic. Just a couple of final points in line with the name of the podcast. What have been the toughest decisions?
I think the toughest decision was obviously having to, I think, acceptance. Maybe it's more acceptance that this was the end of the road. It was for me. I was like, no plan B, failure's not an option. And there's a lot of learning that's come out of that for me. And I think a key thing that there's been a few big shifts in who I am, I think. And I think there's something, I had a conversation with somebody the other day around clever quitting. And that sort of evokes a lot of thought in terms of sometimes you need to accept what the end of the road is. And that's a struggle for me. If I decide I'm doing something, I'm doing it. And that is just it. And I think sometimes you just have to accept. And it's something moving into my sort of new world is there could be situations that, however hard I try, you can't always make the change you want to. And it's maybe recognizing that.
It's a great one. And again, just leading on for that then. So you've mentioned the new venture. So just a few moments to explain what that is, and also whether you would be open to speak to people that have been in a similar situation about the experience, to give them the tools to cope and to make the right decision going forward.
Yeah, so on sort of your first point, so came out of doctor's fertility, and I was like, right, what next? And one thing I would say to people is that you may feel like there is no hope, but there is always hope. And it's if you feel there's no hope, I would absolutely recommend that you go and seek some professional support. So I decided this was kind of a time to kind of rest and restore. And I've made, going back to the mental health piece, I've made some huge changes to my life, massive changes. So I now have like a goal of walking at least 10,000 steps a day. I do that twice a week with a really good friend, and that keeps me accountable. I try and do workout on top of that 4 times a week. Eat better. I find the exercise anchors me in because it makes me get to bed earlier, and sleep for me, I've learned, is the cornerstone. So there's been a lot of changes for me as a person, and then it's like, right, what next? And then I started getting asked to help other healthcare businesses, and I was still really open at this point in time. So I started going in and helping a few businesses, and that's when I realized I had this really unique background that kind of spanned the whole of the healthcare service. I was a healthcare professional, I've been involved in drug discovery right through product life cycle to launching a clinic. So these collective experiences suddenly felt quite useful. Then I realized I had a very good network. Another observation I'd sort of seen, especially in digital health, was that sometimes there could be some more governance and balancing the demands of having that high growth and investors with that patient safety. So I've launched the Digital Health Assurance Company. Our mission is to support businesses to provide high quality patient care alongside sustainable business growth. So there's lots of different things we can help businesses with. So we do a lot of work with them around the Care Quality Commission and setting up that governance, service development, marketing, some due diligence work. So that's what I'm doing now. So going out again it feels right. And I was sort of gently challenged by my husband and my dad to be like, why don't you go back into big pharma and kind of get a job?
Get a job, yeah.
Why don't you get a job? And I reflected on this, and I was like, it's a bit like The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Once you go through the wardrobe into Narnia and experience that other world, sometimes the terrain's pretty tough and you're in a jungle with some venomous spiders and there's a snake and it's pretty hard, but I find that really thrilling. And then I realized that it wasn't for me. So I also want to take the learnings that I've had and to use them positively, and also to help other people. So that's what I'm doing now. And then in terms of can I help others, of course, putting my healthcare professional hat on, I wouldn't feel right without sort of saying to, if anyone is feeling like they're struggling with the mental health, to just to signpost and don't be afraid to see a GP. And there's also some brilliant resources out there. There's the NHS website, but there's also Mind, that has a brilliant section for apps that can support your mental health. And there's also the Samaritan. So there is so much help out there. If you feel you need it, I'd really encourage anybody to reach out. And I wouldn't feel right not saying that.
No, well said. And I think, I think I may have touched on this before, that if we can get a network of people that have experienced something like this, whether they stay anonymous or not, I think tapping into that pool of lived experience is invaluable, and that's obviously something that we'll be looking to arrange and promote going forward.